Hemmed in between India and China lies Nepal. A small mountainous country the size of the state of Iowa, but 10 times more populated. 30 million souls, mostly Hindus, live in this landlocked country, including 1 million in the capital, Kathmandu. Nepal is one of the 10 poorest countries in the world. A third of its population live in rural areas, at least 2 hours' walk from the nearest permanent road, and rely on natural resources and the cultivation of rice to survive. In the mountainous regions, there are few trees left to retain the stones that perch above the villages, bustling with small shops. According to the Hindu religion, the Nepalese people celebrate in their ancient temples the rhythm of the earth, an endless succession of periods of creation, preservation, and dissolution. Science backs them up. Geologists like Jan Klinger look back at Nepal's tectonic origins.
The tectonic plates in this region mean that India rises up at a speed of 4 centimeters per year. The plates that make up the Earth's crust are stuck. They become deformed over a time, and when the two plates move together, the upper plate, the Eurasian plate, deforms and creates chains of mountains. We squeeze the Earth's crust and create landforms. In fact, these two plates rub together. They're stuck. So while it's pushing behind, here it's stuck, and that builds up until the crust goes beyond its limit of resistance and releases, producing an earthquake, which allows the tension, the energy in the plates to be released, and this produces an earthquake.
The last major earthquake in Nepal was back in 1934 and reached 8.3 on the Richter scale. In 2014, Jan Klinger published a study that suggested that the 1934 event was a warning of another imminent earthquake at this fault line. History would prove him right. On the 25th of April 2015, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal.
If I put that much energy into the system, a 7 or 8 magnitude earthquake will release about the same amount. So today, where have we released? Which zones have been released? Which zones don't need to be released as much? By doing this work, we're able to pinpoint the zone that broke as one of the zones that was susceptible to breaking.
Jean-Louis Meunier is also a geologist. He traveled to Nepal just after the earthquake to install GPS receivers that would measure any new movements of the ground.
Some areas of the Himalayas, like the area to the north of Kathmandu, rose up by almost a meter in the space of a minute, because the earthquake lasted for about a minute. In other areas, paradoxically, the Himalayas sank down. For instance, some of the highest summits in the Himalayas sank down slightly for a moment.
The number of deaths directly caused by the earthquake is estimated at over 8,000. Although geologists had foreseen the possibility of an earthquake, it was nonetheless impossible to predict its arrival with any precision.
The way we work is that we look at historical earthquakes. We try to understand the size of those quakes in terms of destruction. Catastrophic earthquakes higher than a magnitude of 8 come about every few hundred years, between 700 and 800. And above that, you have the quakes that are only partial and which are added to the cycle.
Qui, eux, reviennent par-dessus ce cycle.
Above the epicenter, stone villages are completely destroyed by the shock wave, killing hundreds of people. The survivors are left homeless.
Hello, my name is Kenji Galung. I'm 12 years old, and I've lost everything. My house, and even my school.
When the earth shook, I was getting ready for the full moon festival. I was heating up some rice wine with myrrh that we call rekshi, just as I am now. Around me in the village, everything burned. Everything collapsed. We were afraid of aftershocks, so we went into the fields. After the earthquake, we spent 3 days in the fields with the animals with nothing to eat. Luckily, friends from other villages arrived with clothes and food. Today we have nothing, but we still need to carry on living. Now we live up here in the fields in an encampment of tents that we built quickly using tarpaulins. But these are not our real houses. Tomorrow, we don't know where we will live.
The 2015 earthquake was a catastrophe for Nepal, but at the same time, it happened on a Saturday, on a beautiful day at the end of the morning. So the rural population was out in the fields, the children weren't at school, they were playing outside. So the destruction was not hugely catastrophic in terms of loss of human life. If the earthquake had happened in the middle of the night or when the children were at school, it would have been much more catastrophic.
In the following days, dozens of aftershocks continued to shake Nepal, including one strong tremor measuring a whopping 7.3 on the Richter scale. And then another threat looms over the villages, the arrival of the monsoons. Heavy rains pound the stricken country. Water is inexorably drawn down into the earth. While it runs on the surface, it washes away the ground and turns roads to mud. But when the rainwater pours into the open wounds created by the earthquake, landslides are inevitable. And in Nepal, whole sides of mountains collapse.
So, just before the monsoon, the bowl has been shaken. So you have a number of slopes that are unstable, and when you add water to that, the ground gets heavier, and fissures are going to open up because you have put water in them. So you're going to create landslides that probably would have happened at some point, but over a longer period of time.
During the monsoon, you have a massive runoff from the Himalayas, several meters. There's a huge amount of water falling on the Himalayas, which creates small quakes. Little tremors that are nothing like the same magnitude as the major Himalayan earthquakes.
This village was literally swept away by a landslide and submerged under a flow of mud. 24 more victims are added to the number killed by the earthquake.
That was my house. The rain swept everything away. At 1 o'clock in the morning, it was raining really hard, and the land slipped. Then the landslide took down 13 houses. A group of 25 people tried to help someone whose house had been buried, but they couldn't get in.
There is no rest for the villagers. The monsoon season is the busiest time for farmers, tending the fields, the animals, and the crops that have survived. Further down the valley, Nepal's highly populated capital city was also severely shaken. Here, 1 million people live above the clay deposits left behind by a prehistoric lake. The seismic waves amplify as they cross the boundary between hard rock and soft ground. Traditional houses built of stone or brick are unable to survive the quake. Only recent constructions made of reinforced concrete still stand, and only where the steel is still holding the walls and floors together. Otherwise, the lower floors that support the weight of the building collapse.
If you go to Nepal, I just went afterwards, not all the houses had fallen to the ground, far from it, but all the houses had been severely damaged and at the risk of collapsing. In any case, they are no longer habitable. They don't collapse during the earthquake, but they crack and break, and it just takes one slight thing to make them collapse.
In all, the earthquake caused 9,000 deaths and $10 billion of damage, half the country's gross domestic product, an exorbitant cost for Nepal. In order to find survivors, rescuers risk their lives. They excavate under floors that could collapse at any moment. By intervening quickly, emergency workers saved hundreds of lives.
It's extremely difficult to say it in words. Right? I was standing outside my gate when it happened. And the first shake was from the west heading to the east. My gate was swinging at least 3 feet to the east and west because my wife, my kid, and my mother were inside the house. I tried to get inside. The gate was swinging so extensively, there was no way I could open the gate. The road outside is paved with small tiles. There was a rattling sound as if a huge serpent is going underneath your feet. I think it was one of the most scariest moments of my life, man. I thought, I'm dead.
According to Hindu belief, earthquakes are part of the third stage of nature's dance: creation, preservation, dissolution. Of all the natural disasters, earthquakes are the most difficult to predict. We know they are inevitable, but we have no way of predicting them.
In the case of volcanoes, we know that there are warning signs that we can measure. For example, small seismic events that are produced when magma rises into the chamber. But for earthquakes, we don't know what the precursory signs are.
One thing is certain. The measurements gathered by Jean-Louis Meunier's team show that part of the energy stored between the two tectonic plates has not yet been released.
The earthquake this year was incomplete. We're sure about that because our studies show that one part shifted between the north of the mountains up to Kathmandu. But between Kathmandu and the plains, the overlapping part remained stuck.
So a second earthquake could relieve the tectonic strain with even more catastrophic results.
If we imagine that my hand represents the Indian plate, which is going under, here we have the mark showing the contact with the surface. So that's India, and that's what's underneath. And the earthquake that hit in 2015 was a fairly deep section. What still has to shift is this part, that comes from the part that broke up to the surface. And that's another 100 kilometers. We could expect another major earthquake with extremely destructive consequences.
Whether it's a question of months or years, nobody knows. The scientific community will be keeping a close eye on Nepal, fearing that a second quake is probable.